All right, every civilization has basic stories that are the prop of the civilization. Ours obviously would include the signing of the Constitution, the signing of the Declaration, the Jesus's resurrection, all these things that are our basic stories. And of course, one that I tell frequently is the one about Socrates when his friend obviously the Greek philosopher, his friend went to the oracle at Delphi and asked, "Is there any man wiser than Socrates? Is anyone wiser than Socrates?" And the oracle at Delphi said no. And Socrates was baffled because he knew nothing. And he went around town, Athens, asking all the famous people, the politicians and the artists and everybody, asking them questions. And he realized, oh, I get it. They don't know anything either. The difference between them and me is I know nothing. And that's what makes him the wisest man in the world. He was the wisest man in the world because he knew nothing. And that tells you something, that informs you about something, that not only what wisdom is partially made of is the knowledge of how little you know, but how rare it is that everybody else thought they knew. And that is why when I see this thing with this bomber story, I see it unraveling and people sending out their lists on Twitter, of the 13 reasons why it's a false flag, or the 15 reasons why it's Donald Trump's fault, and it's this and it's that. You don't know. The guy who is going to know and who's going to tell you, the guy who's going to make you know, his first name is going to be detective or maybe agent if he works for the FBI. That's who's going to figure it out. And these are the guys who are going to figure it out. It's not going to be, Anderson Cooper. It's not going to be some random guy on Twitter. That's the person who's going to tell us about the bomber. So we don't know that yet. I think we're going to find out soon because it sounded to me like they had a lot of evidence. I hope so. I think the guy should be put away. Obviously a terrorist, no matter who he's working for. So all we're yelling about in the aftermath of these bombs showing up at left-wing places, Barack Obama, CNN, John Brennan, I guess it was directed to CNN. It was a little joke at radical left-wingers like CNN. But all we're really talking about is our discourse. We're talking when we scream and yell at each other in the wake of one of these bombings, we're talking about our violent discourse, our angry discourse, and who's to blame for it. And let me tell you who it is. It's the media. Donald Trump is blaming the media, and the media is going nuts because they say, oh no, it's all Donald Trump. It's all Donald Trump's fault. He's so mean. He says such mean things. He calls us the enemies of the people. Who do you think is to blame for this? As if Donald Trump dropped out of the sky into paradise, right? We were all sitting around. We all loved each other so much. And then Donald the Orange Man came from sky and appeared and suddenly everyone angry. I mean, as if, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? It's amazing to me that these clowns, these media clowns, don't know it's them, that they don't know what they've been doing for the past. I don't know how long it's been, 30 years, that everyone they disagree with is a racist, that every single thing, we say, someone who's not one of them, not a liberal, not a left-winger, is like, you know what they remind me of? They keep calling us racist, sexist, homophobic. Your culture is bad. Your religion is lousy. Anybody who believes in your religion stinks. Oh, we're changing the rules today. Now homosexuality is fine. And if you don't think so, you're a hater. Now we're changing the rules and men can be women and women can be men. It was in the New York Times science section ran a thing saying that men are women and women are men and all this nonsense. And if you don't believe that, you're a hater. Don't believe that the government should take over all of our energy because we're panicked about climate change. Oh my God, it's climate denial, just like the people who deny the Holocaust. They yell at you, they yell at you, they yell at you, and suddenly you say, oh yeah, here's Donald Trump. And it's like, oh, what was that? Where did that come from? Where did that come? They remind me of that little kid who hits his older brother, and he keeps smacking his older brother, and his older brother keeps saying, would you stop, would you stop, would you stop? Finally, after being punched 20 minutes, the older brother turns around and just smacks him, and the kid's like, you hit me, it's like, you sent Donald Trump, and now he's mean. So all of this, as far as the networks are concerned, and all of the news people, bombs showing up, they don't know who it is. They don't know if it's a false flag. They don't know, just like I don't know. They don't know if it's a left winger. They don't know if it's a right winger. They don't know what it is, but they know one thing. Donald Trump is to blame. It's only two networks. It's only ABC and NBC because CBS is actually better than these guys. Not totally good, but much better than these two. So here's a little montage from our friends at Newsbusters.
We heard the president obviously called for unity today, calling the pipe bombs abhorrent. But it's going to lead to questions about the rhetoric, as I mentioned, we've been hearing in the country for some time now.
David, and the White House is already facing those questions here tonight. And again, that is because of what happened today. All of the targets are people that the president regularly attacks himself. Now, there is discussion among some sources about whether he might want to tone it down in the wake of what happened today. But all of the consensus says that no one speaks for Donald Trump except Donald Trump himself. The question now, with less than 2 weeks to go in these midterms, will he take his own advice and heed this call for unity?
Tonight, while the FBI hunts down whoever sent these bombs and their motives remain unknown, no matter who sent them, there are growing calls to turn down the heated political rhetoric before someone gets hurt. The head of CNN, Jeff Zucker, blasting the White House and the president late today.
While there are no answers yet on what led to today's incidents, President Trump has the biggest megaphone, and there are growing questions about how he is using it.
You know, I want to talk for a minute about this word unity. We're calling for unity. Donald Trump yesterday called for unity. We don't need unity. Why should we have unity? We don't agree on anything. Why should we have unity? We don't have to have unity. We just have to have unity on one thing, that we're allowed to disagree and we should be treated fairly as we disagree. That's the only thing we have to be unified about. The only thing we have to be unified about is that these are political conversations. They get passionate, but we're not going to attack each other physically. We're not going to call each other names. We're not going to be rude and uncivil. That's the only thing we need unity about. I don't want everybody to come together. I hate when they talk about bipartisanship. How can I be bipartisan with somebody I disagree with? We can compromise with each other. We can come to agreements. We can make political arrangements that we have to make because people have power and we have power and they have power. All that's fine. The only thing we have to have unity about is that we're not going to kill each other. So who is it, again, who's chasing people out of restaurants? Who is it that's been, Donald Trump was not president when Ben Shapiro was fighting off like mobs of people trying to keep him from speaking on college campuses. Donald Trump, there was no Donald Trump then, They weren't, that happened before Donald Trump. And by the way, and it was happening to other people too. It was happening to anybody in any class who stood up for himself, who said what he had to say. So all of that stuff predated Donald Trump. And were there any, can you name any conservative who shut down a left-winger, who told a left-winger he couldn't speak? You can't. I'm even wondering, I don't want to get into conspiracies. I know there are bad people on both sides. That goes without question. But that thing where they were shouting at Nancy Pelosi the other day, and I said, well, that's wrong too. I don't even know if that was truly right-wingers, because the one thing I do know is nobody on the right, including Donald Trump, is saying to people, go to restaurants, don't get in their faces, get in their faces. Nobody, when we talk about what you don't know, I told that story about what you don't know when Brett Kavanaugh was accused. I said, look, you don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. And who is it, there again, who is it who says when you don't like the Supreme Court justice, accuses them of sexual malfeasance? Not just him, but Clarence Thomas, not just Kavanaugh, but Clarence Thomas. And what did they accuse Robert Bork of? Smoking dope. He said, I smoked dope. And they said, well, we can't have a Supreme Court justice who breaks the law. So let's listen to what Trump said at one of his rallies after the bomb showed up. Because it really is, it's interesting. Listen carefully to what he says, because every word here is true, and that's why the media went nuts. Okay, listen to this.
The language of moral condemnation and destructive routine, these are arguments and disagreements that have to stop. No one should carelessly compare political opponents to historical villains, which is done often, it's done all the time. Got to stop. We should not mob people in public spaces or destroy public property. There is one way to settle our disagreements. It's called peacefully at the ballot box. That's what we want. That's what we want. As part of a larger national effort to bridge our divides and bring people together, the media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories. Have to do it.
So this drove the media nuts. Why? Because it's true. There's nothing that sets off the left like the truth. Nothing makes them crazier than the truth. It's like watching bugs run around in a box. I mean, it's just the minute they hear the truth, they do not know where to go next. And of course, when he talks about putting politics in this moral framework. Who does that? Who does that? I mean, who says if you don't believe this, you are a bad person? It's not us. What we say to the left is that you're idiots, and they are. They're knuckleheads. Your stuff doesn't work. It's not right. It's not moral. It's not just. It's not achieving what you want to achieve. Sometimes we want to achieve the same thing. Often we want to achieve the same thing. I'd like to make sure that everybody feels comfortable in America, that everybody's fine and everybody's happy. Sure. I don't think identity politics does it. I think it is a travesty. I think it's a monstrosity. I think it's racism. It's racism with a smiley face. But listen, I mean, the thing that baffles me with the press, it really does, because these are intelligent people. These aren't stupid people. You know, I mean, Anderson Cooper's not a dumb guy. That's not what it is. It's that they are just surrounded by themselves. They're like that thing, that new meme that they have, the non-playable character. I love that. It's right, you know, in video games, they have characters who don't get played, and they're just kind of faceless characters. So that's what they call the right now, these NPCs. And that's what it is. They're surrounded by these NPCs who agree with them. So there's no one there to say, you know, calling someone racist is hate speech. Calling someone racist is the worst thing you can say to someone in America. And when someone disagrees with you, and you have, you know, look at me, I'm Jim Acosta, saying, oh yeah, he said he's a nationalist because he cares about this country, but really he's a white nationalist, so he's a racist. Every word, they do that with every word. You're the one who is starting the fight. When somebody then smacks you, you can't just go, oh, you hit me, because you hit him first. So listen to Anderson Cooper. I'll talk about this in a minute. This is Anderson Cooper talking to Jeff Zeleny about that speech that you just heard.
President Trump, a former Secretary of State, and two ex-presidents are, in his words, merely former high-ranking government officials. He gave no names. Nothing to indicate he sees them as individual human beings and distinguished former public servants. As two former presidents of the United States. He also made what appears to be a first attempt at something familiar, putting the perpetrator and victim on equal footing. He also made no mention either of the bombs sent to the offices right behind me here at CNN.
Anderson, he also did not take responsibility at all for any of the heated rhetoric. Tonight, you could hear him sort of spreading around the blame.
You know, it's not his fault. It's yours. It's your fault. It is your fault. It is Anderson Cooper, the guy who called, remember when the Tea Party started and he branded them tea baggers, you know, some stupid sex thing he did with his boyfriend, and he called them tea baggers because they were ordinary people rising up against Barack Obama. How is that not the same rhetoric? How is that not the same rhetoric? Donald Trump is the man the American people sent to answer them. His harsh, nasty way of talking resonates with those people because they've been listening to it from you, Anderson Cooper, for 30 years. That's why they sent him. And as for Roger Zeleny, Jeff Zeleny, he is the perfect example of the other side of this, because it's not just what they say, it's also what they don't say. Let us forget, this is one of my favorite clips in all of journalism. This is the young Jeff Zeleny as New York Times White House reporter before he was replaced by Clinton hanger-on Maggie Haberman. This is him asking the tough questions of President Barack Obama. Listen to this stuff.
During these first 100 days, what has surprised you the most about this office, enchanted you the most about serving in this office, humbled you the most, and troubled you the most?
Let me write this down.
What has enchanted, first 100 days, it's 3 months of a presidency, that was his question. What has enchanted you? How come he hasn't asked Donald Trump that? Hey, Donald, hey, President Donald, what's enchanted you about the presidency? You know, this is the other side of this. It is not just what they say, it's what they don't say. It's 8 years of lying about Barack Obama, about his competence, about the way he ran the government, about the scandals that went uncovered and unreported and unpushed. They would report them, they would say they were happening, but they wouldn't run them down the way they have run down this Russia scandal, which doesn't exist, which clearly is a fantasy. You know, Robert Mueller is doing the right thing by not coming out with his report until after the election. That's the right thing to do. But when they come out, remember, being a leftist means you never have to say you're sorry. You never have to go on like Megyn Kelly and say, oh, boo-hoo, I'm sorry, and then get fired the next day because no apology is enough. You never have to say it. They never have to say, we're sorry, we supported Bill Clinton when he was accused of rape in a plausible way. They never have to say it. Until, Bill Clinton's out of power, and then it doesn't matter whether they say it, then they can say it. You never have to say, oh yeah, for 8 years we didn't cover the IRS scandal. We didn't cover the Fast and Furious scandal. We didn't cover the fact that your State Department lied. And when this Russian thing turns out to be a bust, which it certainly will, are they going to start to say, maybe we should cover this, Spygate thing. Maybe we should, cover why was Obama investigating, planting people in the Trump campaign? What was that about? You never have to say it. Why? Because these clowns don't do their job. And if if you want to hear the media at work, all right, the New York Times, a former newspaper, in their famous book review over the weekend, they went out and solicited crime novelists to write what was going to happen next to Donald Trump. Now, they're crime novelists, right? They're immediately going to go to crime. But I'll tell you a crime novelist that they didn't contact. This guy. They didn't contact this guy. I don't know why. I got all the Edgars. I got all the awards. I've got, books that have been made into movies, bestsellers. They didn't call me. I wonder why. I wonder why they didn't call me. Maybe they didn't want to hear about how, blithering Prevarication III was going to get backed over by a cement truck. No. Instead, they got a lady named Zoe Sharp, a crime novelist named Zoe Sharp, and she literally writes a story in which Donald Trump is assassinated. So in the pages of the New York Times book review, there is a lady fantasizing in print about Donald Trump being assassinated. So here it is. It's the Russian, of course, the evil Russian that he's been colluding with is now sent to get rid of him, right? And the Russian waited until Donald Trump was had gone a few steps past him before he drew the gun. I'm reading her words now, right? He sighted on the center of the president's back and squeezed the trigger. The Makarov pistol misfired. The Secret Service agent at the president's shoulder heard the click, spun into a crouch. He registered the scene instantly, drawing his own weapon with razor-edge reflexes. The Russian tasted failure. He closed his eyes and waited to pay the cost. It did not come. He opened his eyes. The Secret Service agent stood before him, presenting his Glock. But first, here, the agent said politely, use mine. Your media at work, ladies and gentlemen, fantasize. I mean, it's disgusting, fantasizing in the pages of the book review about murdering the president of the United States, but it's his fault. It's his fault. And this is the other thing. Again, it's all different now because of Donald Trump. They act as if they didn't imagine George W. Bush being assassinated. They did. There were artwork, movies, all kinds of things, pictures, sent out imagining George W. Bush, who also, remember, was literally Hitler. Hitler gets around. Hitler, for a dead guy, Hitler must have a lot of energy because he is just getting elected president every other couple of years. George W. Bush, literally Hitler. Mitt Romney, a murderer, a dog torturing, gay bashing murderer. Mitt Romney, a guy who never did anything but show up with people at people's houses with soup. This is the guy, and they have been doing it all this time, but now suddenly it's Donald Trump's fault. Suddenly it's because you never have to say you're sorry. Here's another piece in the New York Times. They have this thing called, I think it's called the Stone or the Rock. It's their philosophy section. We're very deep. Oh man, it is so deep. It's like that opening I did about orange men bad, orange men evil. Here's a guy named George Yancey. He's a professor of philosophy at Emory University. Hashtag I am sexist, okay? This is unbelievable. I'm just talking about hatred. I'm just talking about ginning up hatred. If you are a woman reading this, I have failed you, he says. Through my silence and an uninterrogated collective misogyny, I have failed you. I have helped and continue to help perpetuate sexism. It's like these Stalin show trials. I know about how we hold onto forms of power that dehumanize you only to elevate our sense of masculinity. I recognize my silence as an act of violence. And when people commit acts of violence, you have a right to strike back, right? So he's recognizing just being a man is an act of violence. For this, I sincerely apologize. Sorry, sorry, Professor Yancey, no apology is enough. You have to get on the Megyn Kelly train out of town. All right, now listen, I speak as an insider. In other words, he's a man. I know about what so many of us men think about women, the language we use, the sense of power that we garner through our sexual exploits, our catcalling and threatening. First of all, I'm sure Professor, what's his name, is out catcalling and threatening people. Our sexually objectifying gazes. Ooh, even when you look at a pretty girl, you are committing an act of violence. our dehumanizing and despicable sexual gestures, and get this one, folks, our pornographic imaginations. Are you having a sexual fantasy? You are committing an act of sexist violence. Just being a man. This is not simply locker room banter. Well, yeah, it is. That's what he's describing, right? But a public display of unchecked bravado for which we often feel no shame. Well, he wants to put an end to that, right? This is your media. You stink. And, you know, this is your loving, caring, compassionate media. Of course they're to blame. Of course they're to blame. It's the New York Times. That used to be a newspaper. Of course they're to blame for the rhetoric. They've been doing this for decades now. You stink because you're a man. You stink because you're white. You stink because you're American. You stink because you're Christian. And you send Donald Trump as, oh, you hit me. You bet we did. You bet we did. And you're going to get a lot more of it. There's more to come. You know, Allie Beth Stuckey, who I had the pleasure of meeting, we were doing Ben's Sunday show on Fox. And she told me, you know, I'm very impressed. She's a very intelligent young lady, and I was very impressed with her. And then as we were walking out, she told me that she sometimes writes for the Babylon Bee, which has become, as I keep joking, the second best source of political satire in America. It really has become excellent. She put out her own Democrat campaign video, where she just basically pretends to be a Democrat and she speaks the quiet parts out loud. Go find it, because it's really funny, but we'll just play a minute of it here.
Democrats are the party of equality, so much so that we insist upon unconditionally believing women and disbelieving men because, well, feminism. If you ask us to explain this logically, we will scream in your face and call you a misogynist. Republicans want to take away a woman's sacred right to choose to have her child decapitated inside the womb and torn apart limb by limb with forceps. Democrats celebrate the right to violently murder your child because we're compassionate. Democrats believe that women are powerful and independent. They are also helpless victims of the patriarchy who require government intervention to succeed. Any woman who disagrees with us on this is a self-hating, stupid bimbo. And you know, it's time someone was finally brave enough to say this. Republicans are racist. Democrats have the same positive message for minorities that we have for women. You're a victim, and you're useful to us. If you disagree, we'll insult your intelligence. But it's for your own good.
Go watch the whole thing. That is the rhetoric that started it all. That is where it comes from. That's who they are. That's who the media is. They got no one. There's no one on their staff, no one of power on their staff who represents the rest of us. They only represent themselves. They have been cursing us, cursing everything we love, cursing everything we hold dear, our Bibles and our guns, the whole thing. They've been doing it for years and years and years, and now they're getting some of it back, and they don't like it. Congratulations. Too bad.